Thank you. Have any of you heard me talk about Father Kapaun before? A couple of you? Okay, yeah, good. I'll probably talk about some stuff. I'll repeat some of the stuff that you've heard before, but feel free to ask questions, and if there's something that you've heard me talk to before that you don't think I mentioned, I mean, feel free to bring that up too. So one of the I started giving talks a little bit differently this past year because there had been a number of people that had heard me before. And I usually start off talks now by opening up for questions. And the reason I do that is I just want to make sure that if there's questions about Father Kapaun that you've always had that you're still wondering about, I want to make sure we get those answered. And also a lot of times the questions that you have will help the people that haven't heard me before come to a greater understanding of Father Kapaun also. So were there any things that anybody that had any dying questions that they have about Father Kapaun? Well, good. Maybe I have done a good job on some of my talks. Father Kapaun, I'll go on and make my disclaimer about the name as to whether or not it's Father Kapaun or Father Kapaun. It is actually pronounced Father Kapaun, and whenever I try to make it Father Kapaun in my talks, I make it about for the first 10 minutes and then it goes back to Kapaun because I've known it all my life as Father Kapaun. It is my understanding that the name was mispronounced at the dedication of the high school back in 1956, I believe, is when it was dedicated. Cardinal Spellman from New York was visiting, and he was speaking about the high school, and it is my understanding that he mispronounced his name and that it stuck. Cardinal Spellman would have been the military ordinate at that time. For years, the military ordinate was alongside the Cardinal of New York, or the Archbishop of New York, handled the military diocese also. That was just recently split about 20 years ago, and now we have a archdiocese for the military services. But prior to that, it was just handled by the Archbishop of New York. So he was gracious enough to come here for the dedication of the high school, and it's my understanding that he mispronounced the name. Although I've also found out that there's the mispronunciation of the name probably comes from your own origin, that the Kapaun is a Czech pronunciation of the name, and Kapaun is a German pronunciation of the name. While Pilsen is a Czech community, and Father Kapaun was predominantly Czech, his grandmother was German, his grandmother on his father's side. And interestingly enough, the only foreign language that was ever spoken in their house was German. Father Kapaun's parents insisted that they speak English at their house, but his father's mother, his grandmother, came to live with him for a while, and she only spoke German. So he did learn some German to speak with his grandmother at that time. So like I say, it's funny because when you go up to Pilsen, you will have about half the people that you meet from Pilsen say it's Kapaun. The other half say, I've never heard of Kapaun in my life. It's always been Kapaun to me. So it still remains to be proven. His brother Eugene, before he passed away, told me that it's supposed to be pronounced Kapaun, but he said the way he looks at it is that his brother knows who we're talking about, and God knows who we're talking about, and he said, who else matters? So if I go back between Kapaun or Kapaun, I apologize, but I think we know who they're talking about. Hopefully you will also. Father Kapaun was born in 1916, born outside of Pilsen, Kansas. The farm was about 4 miles about 3 miles from Pilsen. It's 1.5 miles south and 1.5 miles to the west. From his homestead there, that you can still see the spires of the church, or the steeples of the church. So he grew up being able to be out there in the fields and looking at the church while he was there working. Throughout his life growing up, he was interested in helping out his family, helping out others. When you think about the year that he was born in 1916 and the years that he would have grown up, it would have been through the Depression, would have been through the Dust Bowl days here in Kansas. Very difficult times for the Kansas farmers. And their family was no different. I mean, they were struggling farmers. And something that I did learn in this process, there was a man from Great Britain whose name was Scully, and he came and visited the United States, and this would have been back in the 1800s. And he traveled through the Midwest, and he fell in love with the Midwest. He was just so fascinated by the land, by the vastness of the land. And he went back to England, and from then on, he did whatever he could. I mean, any extra money that he had, he would buy up land in the Midwest. And he bought thousands and thousands of acres. Well, what he would do with that land is he would lease it back to farmers for them to use. For farmers that were not able to afford their own land, he would lease the land back at a very reasonable price so that they might be able to make a living as being farmers. And so they called them Scully leases. So Father Kapaun's family had a Scully lease. They leased this land from this Scully. There is still a Scully corporation, and throughout the years they have offered the land back to those people that have been farming it. So if they want to purchase it, they can purchase it back. Every so often they make that offer to those that are currently leasing it. But there's still a Scully corporation, and many farms are still supported because are able to survive because they are a Scully lease, and it's a cheap way for them to be able to use the land. So I just thought that was kind of interesting when I was doing this research. When he was there, growing up, he did whatever he could to help the family. As he was growing up, when he started to ride his bicycle to go to school, went to school usually about an hour early to help serve at Mass. The pastor at the parish at that time was Father Sklinar. Father Sklinar was Czech also, so he would usually preach in Czech. But the people up there said oftentimes, while their parents could understand them, that the kids and stuff growing up oftentimes could not understand the Czech language well enough to understand Father Sklinar preaching. Father Kapaun himself learned a little bit of Czech as he was growing up, but I also found out that after he was ordained a priest and he was assigned back at his home parish, that he really didn't know the Czech language well enough to be able to preach in it. So he took it upon himself to relearn the Czech language or relearn whatever he had lost as he was going away to school, and so that he might feel comfortable giving homilies in Czech. When he was assigned there as an associate pastor, Father Sklinar, or Monsignor Sklinar at that time, would have a Mass in Czech on Sunday, and Father Kapaun would usually have a Mass in English on Sunday. But he did learn the Czech language, and also he always had a great concern about those that would come to him for confession, and he wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable coming to him for confession, and he knew that he would have to learn the Czech language for all of them to feel comfortable coming to him. So those were a couple of reasons why he taught himself the Czech language again when he was ordained. But growing up, he would do things around the farm. He would help his mom with their vegetable garden. He built a chicken coop so that they could raise chickens, so that they could have eggs and also sell the chicken for added income. As he was growing up, going to Mass or going to serve Mass early, when in the whole process of this investigating his life has kind of been amazing to me. In that instead of me having to go out to people to find out what they know about Father Kapaun, It's been more of a case of people coming to me to tell me about their experiences with Father Kapaun. When Bishop Olmsted first asked me to start investigating the process back in 2001, he asked me to look into Father Kapaun's life to see if it was something the diocese should pursue in terms of his canonization. Since I was also made judicial vicar at the same time and was also pastor at St. Mary's in Newton at the same time, I was thinking, well, maybe the easy way to go about doing this is to try to find some dirt on Father Kapaun, and that way I can just say, well, no, he did this, so he can't be a saint. So I would oftentimes play the devil's advocate. And literally about a month after I was given this assignment, they had a little article in the Catholic Advance about us starting to investigate it. I went to visit a parishioner that was in the hospital up in Newton, and it just so happened that there was a couple that was there visiting her also. And this man asked me, he said, "Aren't you the priest that is checking into Father Kapaun's life?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I went to school with him." And I said, "Oh," and it was a classmate of his at the school in Pilsen. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "we entered in during the same year, but he said, Father Kapaun was a good student." And I said, he said that he advanced quickly. He said there were 2 different occasions when he was allowed to skip a grade because he was such a good student. So I started playing the devil's advocate, and I said, "Oh, so he was kind of a goody two-shoes with the nuns so that he could advance." And he said, "No, not at all." He said he was just a very nice man. And he said, growing up, he said the interesting part about it, he said the school there in Pilsen, it was a public school, but it was staffed by 3 nuns from the Precious Blood Convent here in Wichita. They would go up there to teach. And it was, like I say, a 3-room schoolhouse. The first room was grades 1 through 5. The second room was grades 6, 7, and 8. And then the third room was freshman and sophomore in high school. And that was as far as the school went. But he said Father Kapaun just had a sense of the other kids in the school. And he said he would kind of watch, and he said he would be able to pick up on some of the students that might be struggling even before the teachers did. Because he said chances are, he said if you were there struggling, if you obviously did not understand what was going on, he said during a study period or whatever, he said little Emil Kapaun would come up and offer to help you. And he said that he would kind of explain things and help out this kid even before the nuns would know that there was a problem. So he said he did that throughout his career there at the school. And I said, "Oh, so he was the one that always kind of set the curve, so everybody else had to try to get up." And he said, "No," he said, "it really wasn't that way at all." He said he was just a nice guy, and he said that he was obviously concerned with others, and he said he never lorded it over anybody. He said he would just go about in his business, and he said when he saw somebody that needed help, he was there to help him. It was when he was in high school that he started to think about being a priest. His brother Eugene told me that they had gotten religious magazines and stuff as they were growing up in the mail, and he said invariably they would all gravitate to his brother Emil, and he said he would there and read them from cover to cover. At that time, if you were going to be a priest, you had to your family was responsible for paying the tuition at the seminary, and he knew very well that his family could not afford that. So they had received magazines from the Columban missionaries, and he did a little bit of research, and he found out that if he would become a missionary, that usually the missionary society would pay for the tuition at the seminary. So that's what he did. He went to Father Sklinar and asked Father Sklinar if he would write a letter of recommendation to the Columban fathers so that he might become a missionary. So they might pay his tuition. He was really thinking that was the only way that he would ever be able to become a priest. Father Sklinar asked him why he wanted to be a missionary, and he kind of explained it to him. So Father Sklinar said that he said, well, if I can arrange to have your tuition paid, will you study for the Diocese of Wichita? And Father Kapaun said yes, that he would. In talking to Eugene about this, he said, well, he said he really thinks that Father Sklenar helped pay the tuition that first year, but he said after that, he said, I don't think we got any money from him. So he said it was really his parents that put in the extra work, and he said he also had an aunt that had a little bit of money and he said that he knows that she helped out with the tuition also. So Father Kapaun went away to study at the Conception Seminary. Conception Seminary at the time had a high school seminary, so he first went there and completed his high school career, junior and senior in high school. From then he just went on into college there at the seminary. When he was there at the college, he did the same thing. I mean, some of the people that we talked to at the college seminary said that he just was a good guy, and that he oftentimes helped out other people, other students, that they were there as they were there. They did ask that he be a sacristan, so he helped out in setting up for the liturgies and stuff at the seminary also. Basically just a good guy at the seminary too. He was always quite handy. One of the stories that I think is pretty humorous is that there was one year that his dad was taking him back to the seminary. And Conception Seminary is about an hour north of Kansas City. And if you know that part of the country, it is rather hilly. I think it was a Model A that they had. And the Model A had the gas tank was underneath the driver's seat, but it was gravity fed. So by the time they got up to close to the seminary, it was a very hilly country and they were running low on gas. So when they would go up the hill, the car would die because the gas would drain back into the gas tank and it wouldn't make it up to the engine. So they kept trying to go up the hills, the car kept dying. So eventually Eugene or Emil had the great idea that, well, if they would go in reverse, then they would be able to make it up the hills. So they went the rest of the way to the seminary going in reverse. So when they would go up the hill, the gas would flow into the engine instead of away from the engine. So would have been interesting times. Graduated from Conception. From Conception, he went to Kenrick Seminary. Kenrick Seminary, his classmates said he did the same thing. He was just a nice student. They said that he did well in school. They said he wasn't flashy. He wasn't one of the in crowd or whatever, but they said that he was just a steady guy that would help others out. In this process, one of the things that we had to do was review everything that he had ever written. When I was interviewing one of his classmates, I told him that we had volumes of notes from the seminary, from Kenrick Seminary. And I said it looked like that they were probably notes that were passed out by the instructors. And the guy said, well, what are you talking about? And this was a Father Sommers. And he said the instructors never passed out any notes. He said, you have to remember, he said, we were going to the seminary in the 1930s. And he said, this was the late 1930s. And he said, there wasn't money around for the teachers to pass out notes. So I kind of told him, I said, well, we have all of these volumes of notes. And he said, oh, well, he said, those are Father Kapaun's. And I said, oh, and he said, yeah. And he said he would take good notes in class, and he said then he would go, and he said at night he would sit there and he would type up his notes. And he said then he would tell people that needed to help study or whatever, that he would mimeograph copies of his notes so people would have them to help study for tests and stuff like that. And he said he always helped out people like that. And it really is amazing when you look at these notes. I mean, they're all single-spaced and typewritten. I remember when I was thinking, well, great, now we have to read all of those also. So I was able to assign those to somebody else to read. But the first time I realized that he had done them, there was one that was a college biology class, and I opened up the notes to it, and the first glance or the first page that I had opened up, there was a picture of a grasshopper, and it was so detailed. I mean, it looked like it was something that had been printed up, something from a textbook. But then when you looked at it closely, you realized that it was hand drawn. and it was his work. I mean, he'd hand-drawn this, and so that was Bishop Jacobs at the time, and I kind of told him about these and all these notes and stuff, and I said, obviously he was far more organized than I was ever at school, so I said, can we have a saint that's anal retentive like this? But anyway, so it was really kind of fascinating. It is still fascinating looking at these notes and looking at all the work that he had done. After he graduated from Kenrick Seminary, this was in 1940, came back to the Diocese of Wichita and was ordained at the St. John's Chapel at Sacred Heart Academy at the time. When Bishop Jacobs asked me to kind of investigate why he was ordained out there, thinking that it might have been some special reason or maybe some connection with the nuns that had been up at the school in Pilsen, but they were doing some construction work on the cathedral that year, so the cathedral was under construction, so they just moved the ordinations out to the college that year. So nothing special about them being ordained out there. Bishop Carroll, or I guess it was Bishop Winkleman still at the time, assigned him back to his home parish, thinking that he did know a little bit of Czech so that he might be able to help out there. At the home parish, the people up there just loved him, fell in love with him right away. I mean, the ones that were children up there just today say that he was just kind of like a breath of fresh air. They said the first thing that he did was he used his salary to buy some sports equipment. They said that he bought a bat and a baseball, and he bought a soccer ball, and he said many of them had never heard of soccer before, so he said he really taught them how to play soccer. During recess, he would always go out there to play with the kids. So they said that they really enjoyed him being there. Again, with confessions, one lady that was up there was telling me, she said, we got the biggest kick out of him coming to hear confessions. He said he and Monsignor Sklinar would come into the church, and he said Monsignor Sklinar always had the confessionals at the back of the church, so he was in the regular confessionals. And he said, so they had a little kneeler up at the front of the church where Father Kapaun would hear confessions. And he said if he would get there a little bit late, meaning after the kids had already gotten into the church, she said that he would come into the back of the church, and then he would be afraid that the kids would not want to come to him because he would see them as he was going up to hear confessions. So they said that he would be there at the back of the church, and he said the minute he walked into the church, he pulled his handkerchief out of his pocket, and he said that he would then hold his handkerchief in front of his face as he walked up to the confessional, so he wouldn't see any of the kids, so they would feel comfortable knowing that he would not know who they were. And she said they always thought that was a nice thing for him to do. And she said, of course, all the kids went to him and would want to go to him instead of Monsignor Sklinar, because Monsignor Sklinar was always so stern and rough on them in the confessionals. So she said he would have long lines and nobody would be over at Monsignor Sklinar's confessional until the nuns would come over and make him go over to Monsignor Sklinar. But anyway, so he served well. During his time there, I mean, when he had spare time, he would often just do work out in the yard. And they said that he had a wheelbarrow, and he would take it around and clean up the yard and do whatever. And they said, but in the afternoon, it was a time when Monsignor Sklinar took his nap, and he said this wheelbarrow that they had a squeaky wheel, or had a metal wheel, so that when you took it over the rocks and stuff in the parking lot, it would make a lot of noise. So he would wrap the wheel with cloth or with old rags so it wouldn't make any noise, so he wouldn't disturb Monsignor Sklinar's nap. Once again, I mean, just showing that he had this great concern for others. During that time, he also started to help out at the Harrington Air Base. Harrington Air Base was about 10 miles to the northeast of Pilsen. He would go there to say Mass for those that were in the service. Think about the time, this was between 1940 and 1942, before the United States got involved in World War II. One thing that I thought was pretty telling during that time is that Eugene, his brother, told me a story. He said, oftentimes he would come by the farm, and if I wasn't doing anything, he would have me go with him to the Harrington Air Base to serve Mass. And he said one day we were there, and he said there had just been news on the radio about some of the things that were going on in Europe with Hitler. He said, I just asked Emil, I just asked Father Emil about what he thought about what was going on in the world. And he told me, he said, there's great evil in the world. And he said, there's great evil in Japan with Tojo. He said, there's great evil in Europe with Hitler. But he said, I think those will be evils that we'll be able to overcome. And he said, but the greater evil in the world is going to be communism. And he said, communism is what we're going to have to continue to fight. And I thought that was very telling when you consider that it's communism, that he died under communist rule. And Eugene told me at that time too, he said, he said at that time, or he said, after we found out that he had died in the prison camp, and he said, I would think back about that time. And he said, I often wonder whether or not he had premonitions of how he was going to die. And he said that he just thinks that he might have. And he said because of that statement, and he said because of other statements that he would make. And something similar was said by, I mentioned that we had to read or go over all of the things that he wrote. The reason we had to do that was to make sure that everything was doctrinally sound. So we had Father Carr and Father Joe Giles, both here of the diocese, read all of his homilies. And as they were reading his homilies, both of them said to me on different occasions that it's amazing about knowing about his life now and reading his homilies. He said a lot of things were as though he did have premonitions. And I had never told them about what his brother had said, but they said in a lot of things in his homilies, he preaches about things that actually happened to him later on in his life. So that they too wondered if he had this gift of premonitions throughout his life. Another story that I've never really mentioned this to anybody. I did write up something about it and put it in the paperwork that went over. One of the committees that we formed was a historical committee, and their task was to read everything that had ever been written about Father Kapaun. And they had to kind of make answer a questionnaire that we had developed about Father Kapaun's life. So each one of these people that were in this committee read one of the books, and they did a review on the books, and then they kind of did that. And one of the guys said that he made a timeline because he just found that easier when he was doing things, just to kind of, so he could remember what to write about when it came for him to give his opinion. And he asked me something rather interesting. He asked me if there were ever any claims of Father Kapaun being able to bilocate. Because one of the things that we were required to do is to talk about things, possible bilocation, them being in two places at one time. And I asked him, I said, well, why do you say that? And he said, well, in doing this timeline, he said, it isn't as though that there's ever anything that is really in conflict, that we have two stories of him being in different places at one time. But he said, he said, when you look at it, and he said, there's a period of his life from after he was ordained to the time that he died. And he said, when you look at everything that he accomplished, he said he just wonders how he was able to accomplish all of these things. And he said, especially when he was in the service, when you hear about him doing this, and we do have records of his service record. I mean, he would send back reports both to the military ordinate, but also to Bishop Carroll here in Wichita, talking about the number of baptisms he did, about the number of weddings he had, about the number of people that would come to communion and stuff. And the numbers are really incredible during this several years of this. And so I told the guy, I said, we really haven't ever had anything reported about him being able to bilocate. But I said, there has been a question raised as to whether or not he needed to sleep. And one of his commanding officers in Korea This was before he was captured, and he said that they were, and he said that they were in an area, and he said it was kind of an abandoned town, and he said so they had kind of taken over the town, and he said it was a night. He said I was having a sleepless night, so he said I was up and I started walking around, and he said I saw some light coming from a place, a house where there shouldn't have been anybody. So he said he went over to investigate. And he said it was Father Kapaun in there. And he said Father Kapaun was there writing letters home to the families of those people that had passed away that day, those people that had been killed in action. And he said he always did that. He said he always wrote letters home. And he said, I started thinking then how he was able to do this. And he said, I just wondered if he ever needed to sleep or if he ever did sleep. Because he said, when I think of the number of times that I saw him up in the middle of the night, and he said, I never did see him sleep. He said the only times I saw him, he was up doing things. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting, and it's something that would never be proven or whatever, but I think it is something that kind of makes you think that maybe he was a saintly man here on this earth, and was able to do extraordinary things like that. But who knows? But anyway, so he was there in Pilsen and Harrington when the United States went to war. He asked Bishop Winkleman if he could be released to go into the military to serve as a chaplain. He fell in love with the chaplaincy when he was there helping out at Harrington. And he said that he knew how desperately those men needed a priest. So Bishop Winkleman allowed him to go. He went and he served in the India and Burma theater. He got there probably right as the major fighting in that area was starting to die down. But he was known for his willingness to go out and to take his Jeep and go out and say Mass for the men out in the fields. They said that they know that he put thousands of miles on his Jeep. Even in World War II, he did not have much luck with Jeeps. I think his Jeep that he had there was shot and was unable to be repaired. So his driver, Mr. Sherman, said that from then on, he said that Father Kapaun would just take to the bike, and he said that he would ride his bike. So he said, I found it easier because he said I didn't have to worry about going out and being shot, driving him any place. So he said, I was kind of relieved, but he said, it got to be he said, not really humorous, but he said it was something that we all started to do. He said, at that time, most of the heavy fighting was done, but he said there would always be pockets of resistance. And he said out in the jungle and stuff around, and he said the soldiers would be out there on patrol, and they would come across some Chinese hidden in a cave or or Japanese hidden in caves or hidden somewhere. And he said invariably you would hear shooting. And he said it got to be the thing to do in the camp as people were there in the camp. He said automatically when we'd hear shooting, he said everybody would get up and stand up and look around to see where Father Kapaun was, because they said he would be on his bicycle heading to the where he heard the shooting, because he said he knew that's where the men needed him the most, was there where there was fighting. So he said it just got to be the thing to do, where everybody was just saying, well, where's Father Kapaun now? And looking to see around the camp to see where he would be taken off to. Another interesting thing about World War II is that while he was there in India and Burma, we know that he befriended a number of missionaries. Some of them were Italian missionaries, but one of the interesting things is that he befriended some Columban missionaries, some of the missionaries who he had wanted to go to their order when he was going to become a missionary. And he continued on his relationship with these missionaries. Because we have stories from missionaries, or we have letters from missionaries after the war, where they were sending letters back thanking Father Kapaun for the money that he had sent, or for the clothes and stuff that he had shipped over, knowing that they continued to need those items. So he continued on in helping out those missionaries well after he came back to the United States. When he got back, he was assigned back to his home parish. Monsignor Sklinar was going to retire, so he was assigned as pastor there. He was really only there for a short time as pastor. If we go back to his concern for the people there, he went to Bishop Carroll and he explained to Bishop Carroll why he was uncomfortable being there at his home parish. And he said, growing up there, he said he knows all of these people. And he said that his family grew up alongside of them. And he said that he just felt that the people were so uncomfortable going to him for confession because he knew them. And he was afraid that they would not feel comfortable coming to him for confession. Bishop Carroll kind of understood what he was talking about, and so he told him that he would reassign him. But in that time also, Bishop Carroll asked that he go away to study using his GI Bill. He went to Catholic University in Washington, D.C., wound up getting a degree in education, a master's degree in education and a minor degree in history. Came back to the United States thinking came back to the diocese thinking that he would probably be assigned to one of the high schools in the diocese. Bishops having a mind of their own, started having Father Kapaun do a little bit of fill-in work. So he went for a while and filled in at St. Teresa's in Hutchinson. He went out to by Dodge City and was at Spearville and what is now the Dodge City Diocese. And then he was assigned to go to Temkin. Temkin is another Czech community. Many people still remember him in Temkin. One of the guys that was there in Temkin was the man that owned the farmers co-op there in Temkin. And when I talked to him, he said, it's a good thing that he left when he did, because he said, I'm not Catholic. And he said, when he would come in and he would talk to us there at the co-op and stuff like that, and he said, I was sitting there thinking with him as the priest, he said, I really probably should become a Catholic. And he said, but then he was transferred. So he said, that put me at ease, because he said, then I didn't have to become a Catholic because Father Kapaun wasn't there any longer. But as he was there in Temkin, the military requested that chaplains consider rejoining the military. After World War II was over, the people were coming home from the war, and most of the chaplains left their service, went back to their home parishes or home churches or home dioceses, if they were Catholics. And so they found themselves in rather dire straits. So they put out a call asking some chaplains to return. Father Kapaun, though he loved it there in Temkin, asked Bishop Carroll if he might return to the military service. Bishop Carroll didn't respond to his request first, so after about 6 months, he wrote him another letter. Bishop Carroll was still kind of slow in responding, so he asked him personally if he could rejoin the military. Finally, Bishop Carroll allowed him to do so. Went from Wichita to Fort Bliss, Texas, when he re-enlisted. When he got to Fort Bliss, Texas, most of Fort Bliss had been returned to the elements after World War II. They say that the cabin that he was assigned to looked as though the Dust Bowl had returned. They said many in the corners of the cabin and stuff like that dirt and dust was about knee high. So he wound up having to shovel out the cabin where he lived. If you can imagine West Texas, you can imagine it being that way. So he got settled at Fort Bliss. A man assigned to be his roommate was a man named Ozra Barkley. Ozra just passed away in January of this year. And he said that when he got there to Fort Bliss, he said he went to the billeting office and they told him that he was going to have to bunk with a Catholic chaplain. And he said, I won't do it. He was an Episcopalian and he said, I won't do it. And they said, well, you can bunk with a Catholic chaplain or you can find yourself a place in the gutter because we have no place for you. So he said, being disgruntled, he said he went to the cabin to start to bunk with this Catholic. And he said, he opened the door and he said the first thing he looked at when he opened the door was right there on the wall by the front door was this huge picture of the Virgin Mary. And he said, what now? So he said he got in, was started to bunk with Chaplain Kapaun. While Chaplain Kapaun was sent to Korea, he said that he was sent to other places here in the States. But he said before we parted ways, he said I was Catholic and I was married to a Catholic woman. So he said, needless to say, I don't need to tell you how I feel about Father Capon. And he went on to tell me about their relationship with Father Capon, and he said, after the war, he said during the Korean War, he said they had heard rumors that Father Capon had been captured, but he had never heard official word. And then after the war, he said that official word was given that he had died in Korea. And he said it was just like they had been, he said it was just very painful. He said he just remembered crying when he found out that Father Capon had died there. And he said at that time, he said he just prayed for Father Capon's intercession at that time, because he said he knew that if anybody was in heaven, Father Capon was. He said about 6 months after that, he and his wife decided to start a family. He said he had gotten a job. His wife was working. He said they had settled, I think they'd settled in Little Rock, and he said they were ready to start a family. So he said they started trying to have kids. He said couldn't have kids. And he said they went to doctors, and he said had checkups from the doctors and stuff. And he said they got the news. They told his wife that she would never be able to bear children. They said that her uterus was folded and that she would never be able to conceive. So he said, of course, we are very upset because he said we did want to have kids. And he said, I just started praying for Father Capon's intercession, just telling him if anybody can help them out, that his prayers would help them out. He said about 6 months later, he said his wife got the flu and she just couldn't get over it. And he said then he started getting the flu symptoms and stuff also. So he said they both went to the doctor, and he said they were getting checkups from the doctor to find out what they could do to get over the flu. And so he said the doctor called him in, and he said the doctor looked at him and he said, well, I don't know why you're sick, but he said your wife is sick because she's having morning sickness, that she's pregnant. And he said, but there's no excuse for you. But he said, so they had their first child. And he said, at that time, he attributed it to Father Capon's intercession. And he said, the doctor told him, he said, I don't know how you got pregnant, because he said, you can't get pregnant. He said they had 3 kids. Each time they had a child, they prayed for Father Capon's intercession. And he said, each time his wife got sick, and then he got sick, and they had their child. And he said with the third child they had, it was a difficult delivery for his wife, and he said they wound up having to do a hysterectomy. And he said the doctor called them in, and he said he told them, he said, I want you to understand that each one of your children is a miracle. Because he said your wife's uterus was still folded, and he said, it's impossible for her to have conceived. So anyway, they are convinced that each of their children are miracle children. We did kind of look into that, and the hospital that they were born in had since burnt. The records were lost. The doctor had long since been gone. So there really weren't any records or anything for us to look in terms of as a possible miracle. But so anyway, that's Oswald Barclay, a good man. He and his wife were very good people. Father Capon going over to Korea. From Fort Bliss, Texas, he came back through the Kansas during Christmas time of 1949, and from there he spent Christmas with his family. Then he went to Washington State, and it was from Washington State that he boarded a boat to go to Japan. In Japan, the men there just sang his praises. One guy, I forget his name now, tells the story of Father Capon baptizing him. He said that he came from a family of 13, Joe Ramirez. He said he came from a family of 13 kids. He said he was the middle one. He said 6 older and 6 younger. He said when I was born, he said I was born in California. And he said the day after I was born, my parents moved to Texas. So he said I was born, and then as they were packing up stuff, and he said so they moved to Texas, and he said all of his brothers and sisters after him, and all the ones before him were all baptized. But he said they just missed me because we were in transit from California to Texas, and he said he guessed it just slipped his parents' mind or whatever. So Father Kapaun baptized him when they were in Japan. Again, Father Kapaun would spend his time with as much time as he could with the military. When they would biovac, when they would do their training and stuff, he was always out there camping with them. Chaplains did not have to go there to be in the exercises, but he was always there with the men. The men loved him for it. They appreciated his presence. Went over to Korea. When they were in Korea, Father Kapaun did the same thing. One man that I talked to, a man named Tibor Rubin, was Hungarian. He was a Jew. And during World War II, he was in Auschwitz. And he is the only member of his family that survived the concentration camp. After Auschwitz was liberated, he promised himself that he would do whatever he could do to help repay the United States for becoming involved in the war and basically saving his life because of the camp was he eventually liberated. He decided that what he would do, 3 years after World War II, he was able to immigrate to the United States. He decided that he would join the army. So he joined the army. When they found out that they were going to Korea, his commanding officer told him that he didn't need to go, knowing that he was in the concentration camp, so that you don't need to go to harm's way again. Tibor said no. He said, that's where my friends are going, my buddies are going, and he said, they're the only ones I know. So he said, I want to go with them. Tibor talks about Father Kapaun being a saint, but he said, I knew he was a saint before we were captured. He said, we were under fire one day, and he said, everybody was kind of scattered out in this huge field. And he said, we were all just hunkered down into whatever ditch, whatever gully or whatever we could find. He said bullets were literally flying over their heads. He said every time somebody would stick their head up out of their ditch or whatever, he said you would hear bullets fly, just going over him. And he said, I knew I was going to die that day. He said, I just felt like I was going to die. And he said, all of a sudden, he said he felt a hand on his back. He said he turned around and he said it was Father Kapaun. And he said Father Kapaun was there, and he said he'd gotten in this little ditch with me. And he said he always would stuff fruit or whatever he could find in his pockets. So he said he asked me if I wanted a piece of fruit. And he said, yeah. He said, I love it. And he said, so he just sat there and he talked to me. And he said he talked to me for a while. And he said, I just got this great sense of comfort. And he said, Father Kapaun told me that it was going to be all right. So he said, I knew it was going to be. And he said, so that we talked a little bit longer. And he said, then he told me that he was going to have to go. And he said, do you want to pray? And he said, yeah. And he said, so he prayed the Hebrew scriptures with me. And he said, I'll never forget it. And he said, I'll never forget that feeling that he gave me. And he said, from that day on, he said, I knew that he was a saint. Because he said, why would he come and do this? He said, I was a Jew. He said, he didn't have to come out to me. He said he didn't really know me at all other than I was in his unit. And he said, he had no reason to come out and do this. And he said, he did it. And he said, he just made me feel so at ease. He said, I knew everything was going to be all right. So Father Kapaun continued on in that fashion. On November 2nd of 1950, Father Kapaun was captured. The United States and the United Nations forces had no idea how many Chinese troops were in North Korea. The intelligence that was given to General MacArthur at the time said that there may have been a few thousand Chinese troops in North Korea, when in actuality there was probably between 250 and 300,000 Chinese troops already in North Korea. The Chinese were hiding up in the wooded areas and along in the mountains, so no one knew that they were there. There had been a few reports of people seeing men that were in Chinese uniforms, but they are all kind of dismissed as being just observers or whatever. So when they came in force. Father Capon and his unit found themselves being surrounded. The order was sent out for all the men to make it to safety whatever way they could. Father Capon and Captain Anderson, a doctor, volunteered to stay behind with the wounded. That's kind of a misconception of how things were going. I mean, they were kind of assuming, or we always kind of assume, that there was this group of wounded and whatever, and the wounded were grouped together because Father Capon went out and pulled them off the field. They said that he literally went out under an enemy fire and pulled these men from the field and pulled them back to safety. The place where they were gathered was actually the 3rd Battalion headquarters that was being overrun. They had a ditch that the North Koreans had built or dug earlier, and he was bringing the wounded into this ditch or this dugout. Some North Korean soldiers or Chinese soldiers saw him dragging the wounded into this dugout, so they started throwing grenades into the dugout, and Father Capon knew that if that continued, that they would all be dead. One of the people that was there wounded was a Chinese officer. So he convinced the Chinese officer to stand up and to shout out that they were going to surrender, to stop firing, that nobody there could fight back. So they did. So he arranged for the surrender so that they would not be killed. They were taken into custody or as prisoners. The following day, they were starting to gather the men together to go on a march. They were going to march them to a gathering place. It was the Simbok Coal Valley, where they were going to gather all the prisoners and then march them north to the prison camp. As they were being lined up, Father Capon saw across the field or across the road, down the road a little bit, that there was a North Korean soldier that was getting ready to execute an American soldier that was there in the ditch. So Father Capon went over and pushed him out of the way and saw Herbert Miller. Didn't know Herbert at the time, but they were in the same unit. Herbert had been there the day before when they'd given the command to flee, to go to safety as quickly as they could. He said there were about 6 of them together, he said, including their commanding officer. He said they had found their way to this ditch, and he said there was an open field, and he said on the other side of the field there was a row of trees. They thought if they could make it to the trees that they might be able to make it south back to safety, back behind their lines. So he said his commanding officer and another man got up and started to run across the field. He said they made it about halfway before they were gunned down. So he said the other ones that were left decided that they would just scatter. They would just get up and run wherever they could to try to make it to safety. He got up, started to run, and he was shot, and he was hit in the hand. But he said the blast from the shot pushed him back down, and he fell back into the ditch. He said he got up and was going to start to run again, and he said he looked down, and there was a grenade at his feet. The grenade went off, broke his left ankle. The bottom half of his leg was just in shreds. He showed me his leg. He still has gouges running up and down his leg from the blast. He said he tried to get up, and he said he could not stand on his leg. He said he fell back down, and he said there was a dead Korean soldier up on the edge of the ditch, so he said he pulled him down to hide underneath him. So he said that worked for the rest of that night, and he said the next morning, he said that he could hear the troops starting to come back through, obviously checking those that were down to make sure that they were dead. He said if they weren't dead, they would just kill them. And he said that he felt this dead soldier being pulled off from him. He said the North Korean soldier was there with his rifle pointed at him, and he said he was yelling at me. He said I assumed he was telling me to get up. I tried to get up. He said I just fell back down. He said I couldn't get up. And he said the guy was pointing the rifle at his forehead. He said he closed his eyes, and he said I would like to think that I was praying. He said I don't know if I was or not. because he said, I was just there thinking that the next thing that's going to happen is he's going to feel the bullet going into his forehead. He said then he heard something, and he said he saw an American soldier pushing this North Korean out of the way. And he said he looked up, and he said it was Father Kapaun. Father Kapaun picked him up, literally carried him the 30, I think it was like 36 miles to that Simbok Coal Valley. And he said he told him numerous times, he said, Father, he said, you can't keep this up. He said, just put me down. And he said, his response was always, if I put you down, they'll kill you. So I'm going to carry you. He said occasionally, he said he would put me down, and he said I would hop along a few hops with him with my right leg. And he said, but then he would just pick me up and carry me again. And he said, I have no idea how he was able to do it. He said, I have no idea why he did it. And Herbert Miller thinks of himself as the first miracle, because he said he had no reason to come over. He said I have no idea why that North Korean soldier just didn't kill both of us. He said the only thing that I can figure out is that he was so amazed that there was somebody that had enough guts or gall to come up and push him out of the way that he just didn't know how to react. So he said that he often thinks, why me? Why me? And he just has no answer. So in the prison camp, Father Kapaun was there. He did whatever he could to help men, to help them out. He would spend his time trying to steal food, spend his time trying to boil water for them to have water to try to keep them from getting dysentery. To give you an idea of the plight of the prison camps, during World War II in the German prison camps, the death rate of American prisoners was 21%. During World War II, the death rate of American prisoners in Japanese prison camps was 36%. During the Korean War, the death rate of American prisoners was 65%. That year, in prison camp number 5, there were 3,000 men that were interred there. Of those 3,000, 1,400 came back alive. Most of them died that first winter. They died because they froze to death. One man, a man named William Funches, who was a hut mate of Father Kapaun, said the first night that he got to the prison camp, he said to begin with, he was captured on November 2nd also, but he was on the other side of the peninsula. So while both he and Father Kapaun were captured at the same time, he didn't get up to the prison camp until towards the end of January. And he said when he got to the prison camp, he said they just pushed him out of the truck and he was there. He said the first person that he saw was, he said it was a man that he thought was a crazy man. He said he was scraggly, and he said he had this scraggly beard and stuff, and he said he was standing by this hut, and he said he kept moving in ways, and he said, I thought he's just weird, strange. And so he said, to be honest with you, he said, I started to go the other way because I didn't want to have anything to do with him. And he said, all of a sudden the man stood up and he said, he hollered at me, he said, come. And he said, I didn't want to have anything to do with him because he said he really was acting pretty strange. And he said, no, come. So he said he goes over there, and he said that's when he met Father Kapaun. He said the reason that he was doing these strange gyrations was because he had built a little fire and he was trying to hide the fire from anybody that could see it. They weren't allowed to do it, but he had taken a piece of tin and bent up the edges of the piece of tin and was melting snow. And he said he asked me if I wanted some water, and he said that was the first water that I had since I'd been captured. He said it had been 3 months, and he said I hadn't had any water to drink. He said the only liquid that we had was in the snow that we would bend over and pick up along the way. So he said Father Kapaun gave him the first drink of water that he'd had in 3 months. He said that first night in the prison camp, he said I was there, and he said in the huts, he said there were usually about 14 men to a hut. The huts were just mud huts. He said that they were about 9 feet by 9 feet. So we had to sleep head to toe, so there would be enough room for us there on the floor. He said that so many of us were suffering from dysentery, and he said that you would have to get up in the night, and he said you'd literally have to walk on people to be able to get out of the huts because of the dysentery. But he said that next morning, he said he woke up, and he said he had to get up to go to the bathroom, and he said so he was trying to get up, and he said there were guys on either side of him, and he said he pushed the guy on one side to try to get some room so he could stand up, and he said he was dead. He said he was frozen solid. He said he pushed the guy on the other side, and he said he was frozen solid also. And he said that's when he realized, he said if they hadn't been there, he would have been the one that was dead. And he said, when I say frozen solid, I mean frozen solid. He said when we would carry those men out, he said it was like carrying a board. He said 2 of us would pick them up, and he said one would take their feet, and he said the other one take their shoulders, and he said they were just frozen stiff like a log. He said that the pile, he said that the ground was too frozen to dig graves in, so he said they just had to place them in a pile. He said the pile that he was assigned to take men to, he said by the time that they were able to dig graves, he said it was about 100 yards long and 4 feet tall of just men stacked on top of each other. Oftentimes Father Kapaun would go and take their clothes so that he could clean the clothes and give them to the men that were still alive. To say Father Kapaun would do anything that he could to help the men out. At night, they eventually separated the enlisted men from the officers. Officers were kind of up further on the mountain. Dr. Esselstyn, one of the doctors there, told me that Father Kapaun would always make them go out at dusk, and he would make all of the officers sing. And he said that he would make them sing so that the enlisted men could hear them, so that they knew that the officers were still there. He said we'd sing the Lord's Prayer. He said we'd sing God Save the Queen for the English that were there, and then we'd sing God Bless America. And he said it was some sight seeing Father Kapaun gather us all up or making us go out in front of the huts and sing. But he said he did that every night. And he said then he would go off, and he said he would break into the enlisted men's camp, and he would go from hut to hut, and he said he would visit the men, go as far as he could until the morning, until it started to get light out. And the men in the hut said that he would come in. They said that the doors would be closed, and he would just sneak in, and the door would open up a crack, and Father Kapaun would be in with him. They said that he had a sweater, and he said that he would pull the neck of the sweater up to just under his eyes. He had the arm of a sweatshirt that he would use as a hat, so he said he would pull it down. So he said really the only thing that you could see of him is the slit in his eyes, They said if he had any food, he would bring food. He said he would check to see if any of them needed medical attention. He said one guy said he was known to have his pipe, and they said that he would light up his pipe and pass his pipe around, so everybody would take a puff on the pipe, so everybody could have a little puff. And one of the guys was telling me, he said, Father, he said, I think we probably had tobacco for maybe those first 2 weeks. And he said after that, he said, I don't know what we were smoking, but it wasn't tobacco. But then he'd say, do you want to pray? And he would say a prayer with him. And then he would go off to the next hut. Father Kapaun himself became ill. He had a blood clot in his leg. Dr. Esselstyn said that by the time he came to him, he said the bottom from his knee down, he said his leg had swollen to about twice its normal size. He said it was totally black. He said he knew right away that it was a blood clot, so he said I forced him to get down. We rigged up a trapeze so his leg would be elevated. He said Father Kapaun hated it, and he said he kept wanting to get up, and he kept saying no. So he said he finally got recovered from that enough. So he said he would let him get up, and Dr. Esselstyn, he just started crying, and he said, he said, I think it's my fault that he died. And I felt like a real creep when I would go and interview these meetings. Invariably, they would start to cry and stuff, and like I say, I felt like a real schmuck. Here's people, guys my dad's age that I was making cry by talking to them and stuff, and he said, no, he said, I have to tell it. And he said, I've never said this to anybody, but he said, I really think I'm the reason he died. And I said, well, why would you say that? And he said, I figure if I hadn't let him up, because he said, once I let him up, he said he wouldn't go back down. He wouldn't lay back down. He said he kept insisting on going out and helping the guys doing what he had been doing. And he said, I just feel so bad that if I hadn't let him get up. And so I told him, I said, well, that's silly. Father Capon would have done it regardless of what you had done. And to kind of give you an example of Dr. Essenston, then, when he served in World War II and he was called back up to go to Korea, when he got to Korea, or they told him when he was going over there that he would probably just be in a hospital in Tokyo. He was a pediatrician by trade. They said that he would probably just be in the hospital in Tokyo and that he would probably just help the kids as they came back or came across from Korea. He got to Japan. The day he got to Japan, he was assigned or put into 3 different units before he was finally hooked up with the unit that he was supposed to be in. When he finally got hooked up with the right unit, they said, well, we're shipping out tomorrow to Korea. And he said, I'm not supposed to go to Korea. He said, I'm supposed to stay here. And they said, no, you're in this unit, you're going to Korea. Got to Korea, and they were captured that day that he stepped foot on Korea. So he spent his entire time there in the prison camps. When I was talking to him, this was about 10 years ago now, lived in Minneapolis, and I went into his apartment, was talking to him, and he said, Father, he said, I haven't been able to sleep with my wife for 50 years. And I thought, TMI. This was one of the first interviews I had done, and I said, well, why is that? And he said, if I sleep with her, then she wakes up being bruised. He said, I still have nightmares. And he said, I have thrash about at night. And he said, if I sleep in the same bed as her, he said, I knock her, or he said, I punch her. And so he said, I can't sleep with her. That's what these guys are still going through. So anyway, he's the one that ministered to Father Capon. The guards found out that he was sick, so they took him away. They wanted him dead. So they took him away and to the death house. Like I say, he had the blood clot in his leg. He had developed dysentery himself. He was getting over the dysentery. He got pneumonia. Dr. Essenston said you could just put your ear next to his chest and hear the fluid in his lungs. So when he had the pneumonia, he said that he had a very high fever. He said for a couple of days that he was delirious. They said he was obviously having dreams about his family. They said that he would often talk to his family in his sleep. Fever broke, and they thought he was on the mend. That is when the North Koreans and Chinese found out that he was down, so they came to take him away. They fought with him to try to keep them from taking away. Father Capon came to enough to tell the men not to fight. He said, don't do it. He said, that's when he told Mike Dow, he said, I know I'm going to where I've always wanted to go. And he said, he said, when I get there, I'll say a prayer for you. Told Ralph Nardella, he said, you know the prayers. He said, make sure the men pray. I told other people that they had to continue on, as they were the ones that helped him out with water or food. I told them all that they had to continue on. Everybody that I've talked to that was in the prison camp said that they would not have made it out without the hope that Father and Capon had instilled in them. So they were all quite grateful. The minute the war was over, the minute that they were released from the prison camp is when they started telling the story of Father Capon and how that they were alive because of Father Capon. So they're the ones that started the process. So that was back in 1953. So the rest is history. So that's about Father Capon. He died there in the prison camp. He was there in the death house the first night. One of the things that they had to do on a daily basis was pick the lice off their bodies. We did find that somebody that was there in the death house with Father Capon. He said that first night, he said that first day, he said we went out onto the steps and sat down, and he said we helped each other pick lice off of our bodies. If they did not pick the lice off, they would kill them. Dr. Essenston said that was the easiest way for the men to commit suicide. If they got fed up, if they got tired, they would just quit picking the lice off their bodies. He said the first night, and he said you wouldn't be able to tell it the first day, but he said the second day they would lose a little bit of their color, but he said most of them were in such bad shape from other things you didn't know what it was for. But he said on the third day, he said you knew that they hadn't picked the lice off their bodies, and he said it was too late. He said they would have turned gray, and he said I mean gray. And he said by the time they turned that color of gray, he said it was too late. There was nothing anybody could do for them because they were going to die, because the lice had already sucked so much blood out of them that they would not survive. So he said the ones that had given up hope, or that were ones that quit picking lice off their body. So anyway, this a man told me that William Hansen said that he and Father Capon were out there, and they said that night, he said he tried to take him some food. They wouldn't let him bring him any food. When he said that they saw that people were trying to help Father Capon there in the death house, they put him off into a room by himself, and they wouldn't let anybody come in or go into the room. They said for food, he said they had little cups of rice. He said they put one by the door and said that if he was supposed to eat, that he could come get it. And he said Father Capon didn't have the strength to get up to get any food, and they said that he died. He said he died the next day. So he said said it was about the third day that they were in there that Father Capon died. He was the one that also buried Father Capon. He and another man buried Father Capon. For years, we thought that Father Capon was buried in one of the mass graves along the Yalu River, but they buried him in a different area. They buried him behind some huts that were there by the death house. We do know that there was other people that were buried in that area. After the war, they returned the remains of like 600 some men. It actually turned out to be the partial remains of like 725 men. Of those 725, they knew that about 75 of them were from the area of the prison camp number 5. Those that were not identified were buried in the Punch Bowl, the National Cemetery in Hawaii. They still try to exhume those remains to try to identify the people that were there. Like I said, we do know one had been exhumed, and they identified him as a Sergeant Lusk, who we know died about 3 months after Father Capon and was buried in the same area as Father Capon. So some of the people from the Department of Defense think there's a good chance that Father Capon's remains may be in the cemetery there also. They have a system, I mean, it's kind of like a lottery type system of which graves they try to exhume to identify the unidentified soldier, but they still have men from both the World War II and also the Vietnam War and stuff, so it may be just a matter of time that they find out if Father Capon's remains are there. So it's kind of where we're at with his remains. In the process, all of the paperwork is over in Rome. We're still working on some of the paperwork for the miracles that we hope to get over there soon, and see what we have in movement on that. So there we go. Yeah.
GPS, okay? All right, it's all yours.
Is that the way you're going?
Pardon me?
I said, are you coming in from the north or the south?
I don't know. I'm going to take off right after I'm through here and head up, so I'll be driving up. But they often have one of the bus drivers is from Pilsen, so oftentimes he's the one that gets to take the trip up. So, but they've been there numerous times. So, yeah, Remington Road. Yeah. Excuse me. All right. So you saw the video. Do you have any questions from the video or from what you've seen so far?
Father, what is it? We were trying to St. John, Pilsen.
St. John Nepomucene. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've heard
Yeah.
it.
Is there any information as far as the Korean War, the men that were POWs surviving and also deceased? A record of...
You mean those that were in the POW camp? Yes. One of the men that I was fortunate enough to meet was a man named Phil O'Brien, who worked for the Department of Defense, and his job was try to identify all of those that passed away in the POW camp. There were 1,600 people that died in the POW camp, and of those he was able to identify about 1,400 of them. The remaining 200, they will continue to try to identify, but it's a very good chance that they will never be known, because during that first summer or that first winter when most of them died, there's a very good chance that the people, that those 200 are people that may have been in, or that were in the prison camp, but that everybody that knew of them in the prison camp also died. There was never a list of who was actually there in the prison camp. The names of those that they have were all obtained from interviewing the survivors of the prison camp. So that was Phil O'Brien's job, and he literally interviewed everybody. Of those 1,400 that survived, he interviewed every one of them that he could find, to try to find out who they knew and who they knew that passed away in the prison camp. So that's how they were able to identify the 1,400 that he was able to identify. But that is something that continues on. The Department of Defense will continue that. Phil O'Brien just retired this past January, I believe, from that job, but he worked at it. I think he was in that position for about 23 years. So he's also the one that would have been involved with the negotiations between North Korea and the United States on trying to get people in there to find the remains of bodies there in Korea. So he was very integral, and he is probably the most knowledgeable person about those that were in the prison camp. When Phil O'Brien is not Catholic, and when I first met him, he told me, he said that he was convinced that Father Kapaun was a saint because of the stories that he heard from the people that he interviewed. So he has been very, very helpful to us in our work. But like I say, he is very knowledgeable. And actually, when the last time I interviewed him, he talked about Father Kapaun, and he said that he is convinced that Father Kapaun knew that he was going to die. And he said that he believes that the day that Father Kapaun was captured, that he had come to the realization that he was not going to get out of it alive. And he said that he is convinced that at that time he decided that it was all right, that he was going to die there, but that he was going to serve and help as many people as he possibly could before he died. He said that he truly believed that he had come to terms with the knowledge that God will take him when God wants him, but that up until that time that he was going to, like I say, do everything that he could to help as many people. When he was talking to me about that, I started thinking in my own mind about Father Kapaun, and thinking that was equivalent of Christ. When in the Gospel of John, when you look at Christ, especially in the Passion narratives of John, you see that Christ was in control of the entire situation. I mean, when he was arrested there at the Last Supper, I mean, basically telling Judas, go do what you're going to do, kind of like, let's get this over with. There in the Garden of Gethsemane with his prayers and with him telling the apostles not to fight. Going to the Praetorium, and when he was challenged or questioned by Pilate and also questioned by Herod, he immediately took control of those situations. Pilate asking him questions, and Jesus turning those questions around and kind of putting Pilate on the line, and then Christ willingly giving himself up to death for our sake. And so Phil O'Brien was talking about this, and he was saying that he thinks that he was, he hadn't made the connection between, or what I was thinking about the Gospel of John, but he was saying that he thought that was what would have been going through Father Kapaun's mind. And I thought, that's probably very true. But then I started thinking about it, and I was thinking, well, I think that's true, but I don't know that you could say it at that particular time. Because when I look at Father Capen's life and about everything that I've learned about it, I at first thought, well, yeah, but you could say that about Father Capen when he re-entered the military, knowing that there was a good chance that he wouldn't come out alive. I mean, he told his brother Eugene that he didn't know that he would ever see him again when he left to go to Korea that last time. So I think you could also say it when he went back into the military, but then I thought, you couldn't just say it then when he went into the military, because I think you could probably say that about him when he became a priest, because I think he knew that always death was going to be in God's time, but that he was going to help as many people as he possibly could. And then I thought, well, why would I say it about him becoming a priest? Because I think his priesthood was just a natural flow from his life as a child and his life as a teenager, because that's what he did his whole life, was just do whatever he could do to help other people. So while I agree completely with what Phil O'Brien said, and that he had decided that he's going to die and that he's going to do everything that he can to help people, I think that decision was made way back when he was a child. I think he decided back then. I think he was just that type of a person. He was a good person, and he had decided that he was going to help as many people as he possibly could, knowing full well that his death would come about when God wanted him. So anyway, but a long answer to your question. But so there is some knowledge of who all the people were in the prison camp. Not quite all of them, but they are continuing to work on that matter. So, okay. Yeah.
How did Father get the hosts to, when they were prisoners of war, how did he get hosts to have mass?
Well, that's one fallacy. He was never able to have mass in the POW camp. A lot of people talk about him having mass, but he was never able to, because he never would have had the host or the wine to celebrate mass. When he first got there, when they first got into the prison camp, they allowed him to have like prayer services and stuff. But quickly they realized what he was doing. I mean, at first when they allowed him to do it, they probably allowed it because they did not realize what he was asking. So he would have prayer services, and then they refused to allow him to have any set prayer services. But that didn't keep him from having prayer services. Usually what he would do is in his travels around the camp, if he saw a group of men together, he would just go up to them and ask them if they would want to pray. The one time that we do know that he did have an organized prayer service was on Easter of 1951. And they said that he did organize a prayer service then. And they said that he gathered, or he said he got a few men together, and he said they were up early. And they went out and they set up for this prayer service. And they said by the time the guards realized what was going on, it was too late for them to try to stop it, because so many men had gathered there for the prayer service. And they said literally this would have been up in the officers' compound, and they said literally every officer was there by the time the guards figured out what was going on. So he said it was something that they couldn't stop. So he had an Easter prayer service. But as far as saying Mass, because I kind of cringe when I hear them talking about it, and people talking about it and celebrating the Mass in the prison camp, when it was something that he was never able to do. Yeah.
Yeah, do you know if Father Kapaun was able to, before he passed away, was he able to have his last rites, or?
There was a minister, a British chaplain, although he wasn't Catholic, and the men that I talked to said that they know that before he got sick, they know that he did kind of go off and had a private conversation with him. So in terms of last rites, I don't know that there was another Catholic priest around, but I think he did have the opportunity to talk to another chaplain, and I think he probably would have, if there was some things that he needed to take care of between him and God. I'm sure that he did at that time. But when you consider that when he was being taken away, I mean, and asking the guards and stuff for their forgiveness if he had done anything to harm him and stuff. It's like, I mean, while he may have thought that they were sinful acts, it's stuff like I would say, if that's a sin, I don't have much hope for myself. So, yeah. Yeah.
This is just one thing yesterday when you were talking about him and not, when they're not sleeping part.
Mm-hmm.
It just came to me too. I think, anyway, this is just, that it happened long before then, because when, just all the notes he was writing and all that stuff he did,
That's my thought exactly also.
I mean, Dad started.
With his work, and when I found out those were his school notes, and I thought, how did he have time to do anything else? I mean, because when you look at the extensiveness of these class notes and stuff like that, it's like, I mean, even if he was a good typist and typing all of these notes out, but that was like on a manual typewriter, and it's like, how was he able to do this? So something we probably won't know until we're up there talking to him.
Something.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Anything else before I? A little bit about the process for canonization. The canonization process is kind of like a twofold process. It's a process that we do here in the Diocese of Wichita, and then we send all of our information to Rome, and then Rome kind of does the same thing with the information that we sent them. As I say, I started doing some background research back in like 2001 when Bishop Olmsted asked me to do it. And kind of funny how it worked out, but on the week that Bishop Olmsted, on the week that it was announced that he was to become the Bishop of Phoenix, I had an appointment to meet with him to tell him that I think that we needed to go on and proceed with the canonization process. But once somebody is named, like when he was named Bishop of Phoenix, he was no longer Bishop of Wichita. He became the administrator of the diocese. While he still functioned and did most of the things as a bishop, the administrator of the diocese cannot begin anything new. So what it did was it kind of had made us put this on the burner because he could not officially announce the start of Father Capen's canonization process. So we had to wait for about a year and a half for Bishop Jacobs to be appointed as Bishop of Wichita. When Bishop Jacobs was appointed, I met with him, and after a few months, after he had been here for a few months, he decided to go on and to officially begin the process. So on June 29th of 2008, we officially opened up the process to investigate his life for canonization. At that time, we formed a historical committee, a theological committee, and we formulated a list of witnesses, all of those people that we could find that knew Father Capen, that we would ask or have a questionnaire for them to fill out. The historical committee reviewed everything that had been written about Father Capen's life. They had looked at all newspaper articles, all magazine articles, looked at all films and stuff that were made from him, made about him. Like I say, at the time, there were 3 books written about Father Capen's life, so they reviewed those books. There were 5 members of our historical committee, and I had each one of them kind of go over a section of a period of Father Capen's life, and they kind of combined everything to give like a synopsis of Father Capen's life. I think their review wound up being about 20 pages long of Father Capen's life, giving just the salient facts. I mean, not really going into any great details. They also did a review of all of the books. So all of that was gathered. The theological committee read everything that was ever written by Father Capen, read all of his class notes. They read all of his homilies that we have, read all the letters and stuff that we'd been given that had been written by Father Capen. Their role was to review all of that material, and they needed to make a statement that They did not find anything, or everything was doctrinally sound. That they believed everything that was that he had ever written was in line with church teaching. The interesting thing about the theological committee, and I think I mentioned this last night, both of the priests that were on that felt that when you look at his homilies, that a lot of it seemed to be premonitions of what was going to happen to him later in his life, especially surrounding his death and his homilies about death or dying and last things in the homilies that he had written and gave. Then we also started the interviews. Originally we had about 65 people to interview. About 14 of those kind of backed out, saying that they didn't really know that much about Father Capen's life to be able to really answer the questions and stuff we had. The questionnaire we had itself was about 60 pages long. It was 150 questions, and like each one of the questions had about 4 parts to the questions, so it was a rather extensive questionnaire that we took out. We were able to kind of classify it into different periods of his life. For example, knowing that the POWs would not know anything about his childhood and stuff, but they would know stuff about the prison camp, and the people that grew up with him would know about his childhood, but not necessarily know about the prison camps. So we had designed it so that we just have a couple general questions about his childhood to see if the POWs knew anything about it, and if they had any stories that he had told them and stuff. So of those, with the interviews, we had about, I think that the interviews made up about 1,500 pages of the information that we sent over. The actual documents or the actual results of the historical committee and theological committee, the stuff that they had written up was about another 100 pages, and the remainder of the 8,000 pages were copies of articles and copies of letters and his homilies and basically everything that had been reviewed by either the theological or historical committees. All of that was gathered together. There were other documents and stuff that we needed to include to show that we had done the process correctly. The first thing that we had to do in the process was to send a letter to the Cardinal of Seoul, the Archbishop of Seoul, to get permission or to get his consent to pursue the cause, because the Diocese of Pyongyang in North Korea would have been the diocese that had rights to pursue his canonization, since that is where he died. So the Cardinal in Seoul, readily agreed for us to consider that. And actually, he had heard of Father Capen when he was in the seminary for his doctoral or for his thesis in the seminary. He translated Monsignor Tani's book into Korean. So they sent a copy of that, and it with some of the stuff going on with the advent of us pursuing his cause, they republished that book in Korean. So they sent me a copy of the book that was written in Korean. So anyway, but the process went on. We were able to complete the process in 2011. On July 1st, we officially closed the cause for canonization. That's when we put everything together, boxed it up, had a ceremony down at the cathedral with it. The box was 3 feet by 3 feet by 4 feet, 16,000 pages, it weighed about 325 pounds. So we shipped it off to Rome. I told people that night was the only night of my entire priesthood that I have had nightmares about anything going on in my priesthood. And I said that I had a dream that night that the crate had been loaded on the ship, and the ship was going across, and that as soon as it left the harbor in New York or wherever it was leaving from, that just a page flew out, and then another page, and another page, I had this nightmare of this line of paper going from here to Rome, and that when it got to Rome, when they opened it up and it was empty. but nothing like that happened. So it arrived in Rome to the Congregation for Saints, and they had a little ceremony over there with officially opening it. The first thing that was done over there was they took the 2 copies. They were bound over there in their department. Made sure that everything was done according to the rules and regulations. From that first opening and for them taking the first look at the documents, they sent us a questionnaire back. It was about 7 points that they asked us to clarify so that we could explain our process and explain why we did things in this way. So they were quite thorough in doing that. So we are able to answer all of their concerns, and they accepted the documents as they're in order and for them to start to go ahead with the process. So they were starting with that process. Our postulator over there was working on the positio. The positio was the official story of Father Capen's life that will be documented, and that will, once he is through with that, which I believe they are about through with it, it will come back to the bishop here in Wichita, and he will officially present that to the Holy Father and ask for beatification. In this paperwork, we have a couple things that are going on. We have made a cause for him to be named a martyr of the church. They will consider, the thing that they have to consider is whether or not he was martyred because of his faith, because he was a Catholic priest, or whether or not he was martyred because of political ideology. I mean, there is evidence for both, and I don't know whether or not they will consider him a martyr or not. When I look at it, they have always made that distinction, and so they will say, well, they may say that he was killed or that he was put to death because of his activity there in the prison camp, not necessarily because he was a Catholic priest, but because he was kind of a thorn in their side. My thought is that you can't really separate that out, and so what I proposed was that while you can say that yes, they may have wanted him dead because he spoke up against communism, or because he continued to instill hope in these men. But I said that is also the role of a priest, that he helped provide food for the men because he was a good priest, that he stood up and he spoke out against communist ideals because that's what a priest would do, and that he was a thorn in their side because that is what a priest would do. So my proposal was that while yes, there was also political influencers or political things involved in it too, but you can't separate that out from him being a priest. So it remains to be seen. If he is named a martyr, he will automatically be beatified. They will not have to have proof of one miracle for his beatification. So that would be the easier way to go about doing it. With the documents that we have over there, and also with the documents that I'm working on to finish up our investigation of the 2 alleged miracles that we have, if they do say that no, that he was not, they do not claim him to be a martyr, then they will automatically have the positio that was written by the postulator and also the information on the miracles, so they can go on and go immediately into investigating his life. For beatification. For beatification, what they'll do is they'll have to take the positio and affirm the fact that he lived a life, say that the positio proved that he lived a life of heroic virtue and sanctity. And then with that, and with them accepting the proofs that we send over for one of the miracles as a miracle, and they will do the same thing on the miracles. They will go over what we have, but they will have their own panel of doctors. Ultimately, those doctors will have to say that there is no scientific or medical reason for these people to have been healed the way they are, or in the state that they are now. So it will take both them accepting the positio and the proof of one of the miracles for him to be beatified. Once that happens, there will also need to be proof of another miracle for him to be canonized a saint. So, yeah.
When was he made a servant of God?
Back in 1993. Yeah. And that was done by the Archdiocese for the military services. Yeah.
How many miracles have you submitted so far?
We have the two that we're working on, but we won't do any more until we hear word from those. And even on those two, they will take them one at a time. So we'll ask them to do, the postulator will go over them and use which one he thinks is a stronger case. The postulator that we have, Dr. Andrei Ambrosi, before he became a postulator for Causes for Saints, he worked at the Congregation for Saints and played the devil's advocate in terms of miracles. And he believes that both of the miracles that we're working on are strong enough to be named miracles. So, I mean, that's good news. I mean, because he would be knowledgeable of what they look for and stuff for the proof of miracles. So,
What's the other one besides Chase?
Avery Girlman, who was a young girl that had an autoimmune disease that attacked her kidneys and her lungs. And personally, I think her case is probably the stronger of the cases. So,
That's saying something.
yeah.
What's needed to be classified as a servant of God?
With servant of God, what way they petition Rome, and Rome makes initial inquiries to see if there is anything that prevents them from being named a saint. So like when they petitioned for Father Capon to be named a servant of God, Rome would have sent out word to the different congregations in Rome, and also congregations, other official offices that would know or have this knowledge, and they made an initial inquiry as to whether or not those congregations or those offices had any knowledge that would prevent this person from being named a saint. So that if somebody sent in a letter of complaint about Father Capon, somebody questioned what he had said, like from a doctrinal standpoint, if anybody had raised questions like that, those questions would have been noted, and so that is what the official or the first initial investigation does, is that it discounts any possibilities of those questions being raised in the future. So basically, the statement of a servant of God is a statement that says that at this time there is no reason why the cause should not proceed. So that they don't know of anything nothing had been reported up to that date that would prevent him from being named a saint. Yeah.
And then, when he was declared servant of God, does that have to come from from the Wichita Diocese, or can it come from?
This came, the military archdiocese first started to look into his cause for canonization. So they're the ones that petitioned to have him named servant of God. But having him named servant of God just means that there's really nothing from the church's standpoint that would prevent him from being named a saint. So from that point on, then it was up to somebody to kind of pick up the cause and to work on the cause. The military archdiocese, while they first started into it, they did not have the personnel or the financial resources to pursue it. So they just kind of let it drop. So, yeah.
And when you said financial, there's a large cost to begin the servant of God, correct?
Yeah, well, to begin to do the investigation and to hire the postulator and stuff over in Rome. I mean, there is, for about 4 years, our expenses were between $4,000 and $5,000 a month. Since we completed the work, that has gone back down, but it will pick up again once we get more information over there for the miracles. See, we need to pay. While the Congregation for Saints does do all of this work for it, we do have to give them stipends for their work and stuff, and that's only reasonable. I mean, it would be silly to think that the church should be paying for all of the causes that are currently going on. So, when so some of this is my personal opinion also, but one of the things the church looks for to somebody to be named a saint is whether or not there is a cult that has developed in regard to that person. And cult meaning something good as opposed to something bad. Meaning, are there people that are looking to this person as an example? Are there people that are seeking their intercession? But also, I thought, knowing that this was going to cost a considerable amount of money, I kind of went into it looking at it that this will happen. That if he is a saint, if he is truly to be named a saint, that I'm not going to lose any sleep over whether or not we have the money to pay for it, because I truly believe that if he is to be called a saint, that money will come and that money will be there. And so far, it has. So, yeah.
What's the difference between a servant of God and venerable?
Venerable, the title venerable is given to those that are already a servant of God. Currently, you are a servant of God from the time that you are named servant of God up until the time that you are beatified. But they still give the name venerable. He will be given the name venerable when they accept his positio. So once they accept his positio and say that yes, he did lead a life of sanctity and heroic virtue, he will be given the title of venerable also. Previous to Pope John Paul II, for you to receive that title of venerable, you had to, one miracle had to be attributed to your name for that title also, but that has been done away with. Because it used to be 3 miracles for you to be canonized a saint. John Paul II loosened it up a little, and it became 2 miracles for you to be canonized a saint. So.
Is there given a manual or process or procedures? How do you know what to do in a cause like this? There are procedures and stuff written out. There's been a book that is written about it, but I mean, it was all. it might as well have been written in Greek. A lot of it was in Latin, but so either way, no. And what has been necessary for us to get through the process was really the hiring of the postulator and him helping us out through the process. I mean, we would not have been able to do what we had done without the help of the postulator. So, and it's his job to do that. And the Congregation for Saints requires that we hire a postulator in Rome for that simple fact, that when they get the cases, they want the cases to be in order, and they want all of the information there so that they can go and do their work. So they don't want to be ones that say, okay, well, we've gone through all of this stuff, but you did not submit this form or this form or this form. So it just helps them out to have a postulator, somebody that knows what they're doing, to submit all of this information. Yeah. Okay. Another question?
I read, I think, that your vocation is in some way related to Father Kapaun. Your parents had his picture on the bathroom.
Yeah.
Is this true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I won't say that my vocation was because of Father Kapaun. My vocation is rather odd, but no, but certainly my devotion to Father Kapaun began because my mom had a Father Kapaun prayer card and a St. Jude prayer card taped up on our bathroom mirror. So 9 kids in the family, and we had 1.5 bathrooms in the house, so you saw it often. So anyway, that probably was the beginning of my devotion to Father Kapaun there. So.
2 questions. Did you volunteer with Bishop Olmsted to pursue this? Yeah, every year, the bishops will usually send out a form asking whether or not you're doing all right in your position or the position that you're in now, whether or not there's anything that you desire, anything that you want to do, or anything that you feel good, that you would be good at doing, whether or not you're having any problems and stuff like that. So in that, and since I did have a degree in canon law, I did put on those that if anything was ever done for the cause for canonization, that I would be happy to help out. So that was probably my mistake back then, but I just said that, and even now, I mean, it is an honor to be able to do this work, so as long as they want me to continue, I'll be happy to do it. So.
Been at it for a long time. Do you have any guesses as to how much longer this will take?
No. The postulator, which surprised me he said that once we get the miracles in, or once we get the things of the miracle in, he said that he wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't within 5 years from that time. But even that is just kind of speculation. So.
You submitted them in 2011?
2011 is when we completed the information. We still have information on the miracles that we have not submitted yet. So, yeah. So, still a work in process. But when we submitted everything, the postulator's assistant told me that once we had all of that information over there, that Father Kapaun's name was on everybody's tongue. So what that means, I don't know. So. All right, yeah.
Receiving the Medal of Honor, did that improve the situation to continue either with the military, with Rome, or with the Korean government?
It improved the situation a couple ways. First, it improved the situation in that it made it known that this cult of Father Kapaun is more widespread than just the local church here in Wichita. And it showed that it also reached outside of the realms of the Catholic Church. So that would be something that they would be looking forward to. Another thing, one of the, a priest friend that had studied over in Rome, said that the Italians place a much greater emphasis on civil awards than what we do here in the United States. He said, granted, like his being awarded the Medal of Honor is a great distinction here in the United States. He said in Italy, it is that much more so. He said because they do place that great distinction on those civil honors. So in that sense, it will help also. So the Medal of Honor, while it won't really influence any decision, I think it will make it evident that this isn't something that is just something that is going on in the Diocese of Wichita, but it is truly something that is nationwide, and we also have, I think, significant proof that it is worldwide. So, yeah.
Well, I don't know if you have time for this, but I was just, because you're doing, anyway, a shortened version of Simon Muckowitz's, that part, I mean, that's not a recorded one, but his miracle.
Simon Makovic was a young man who was in the Kansas Guard. He was called up to go to Baghdad. I think he was there for a couple tours. When he was there, he was a sergeant, and he would usually have his men gather together, and they would say the Father Kapaun prayer before they would go out on missions that he thought were dangerous. And he said the men readily agreed in praying for Father Kapaun's intercession for their safety. He was from the Pilsen area, and so he grew up knowing of Father Kapaun. there was one day when he said they had a shaving trailers, and he said they were just trailers, had no windows or whatever. He said on each wall they just had a row of sinks with mirrors on them. He said that's where the men went to shave. So he said he was in the shaving trailer, shaving. He was the only one that was in there. And a mortar struck near the trailer. And he said when it happened, he said that the trailer was jostled, and he said he was literally thrown across the trailer and up into the wall on the other side. So he said when he kind of came to, he said he was very disoriented. He said it had knocked all the lights out of the trailer, so he said it was total darkness in there. And he said he didn't know where he was at. And he said that he would swear that somebody took him by the hand and led him and placed his hand on the doorknob of the doorway. But he said he knew that he was the only one in the trailer. He said he opened the door of the trailer, and he said he looked out, and he said there were a number of men that were there that were needing medical attention. So he said he went out, and he said he helped some of the medics to make sure the men were taken care of. He said once he did that, he said he went back. He thought he'd go back and check out the trailer to see what shape the trailer was in. Went back to the trailer, and he said when he got in, he opened the door of the trailer and looked in. He said he was just amazed, because he said it was just like shrapnel all along the wall. He said the mirrors and stuff had all been broken, and he said there were just shards of glass from the mirrors and stuff all embedded in the far wall. And he was just thinking to himself, he said, well, how did he survive this? And he went in, and he said he went back down to the place where he was shaving, or the sink that he was standing at. And he said there on the wall, he said instead of there being all of those shards of glass and stuff, he said it was just kind of like an arc there in the wall. And he said there was nothing embedded in the wall there in that arc, which is where he would have been standing. So he is kind of convinced that it was through Father Capen's intercession that he was saved that day, because he said every right. He said if it had been any place else, he said from the shards that were in the walls, he said he should have been dead, just been cut to ribbons. So that was one of the first things that we kind of investigated as a miracle. Unfortunately, he did not have any photographs of the trailer, and the trailer was destroyed by the government, by the army, because it was of no use, because it was in such bad shape. So we had no proof of it, but it's kind of an interesting.
And the first time Father Tabaxi told, this is the thing, first time he told this at the family conference and I heard about it, Simon got married the day before and I was at that wedding. I mean, it just...
Yeah. Yep. No, all of the stories I think are very, very harrowing. So yeah. And we do have many stories of favors granted. I mean, there was one man that called up and said that his son, he was a graduate of Capen High School. He said that his son went to Capen. His son went off to Kansas State, and he said that he knew that his son probably wasn't going to church. He said he knew that he was kind of fallen away from the faith, or like many college students do. But he said that he would often pray for Father Capen's intercession, that his son be brought back to church. And he said he'd made a couple trips up to Pilsen and prayed there in the church up in Pilsen. And he said one night, he said he got one of those calls that he said all parents dread. He said it was like 3 a.m, and he said he gets this phone call, and he said it's his son, and he was thinking, what's wrong? And so his son said that he and some friends had been out at Marion Reservoir kind of partying and stuff and drinking, and he said, so his dad was thinking that he was going to say that somebody drowned or there was an accident or something. He said that his son finally said that everybody else had kind of gone to sleep and he couldn't sleep, so he said he just got up and started driving, and he said he just happened upon this church that was out in the middle of nowhere. And he said he went into the church, and he said, Dad, he said, you won't believe how pretty this church is. He said, it is the most beautiful church I've ever seen. And his dad said that he knew right then that he was in the church there in Pilsen. So he just told his dad, he said, you have to come up here. He said, you have to come see this. And his dad said, well, why don't I come up next weekend? And he said he never let on that he had been praying for him to come back to church. So he said the following Sunday he met his son up there and they went to church there in Pilsen. And he said he knows that ever since then his son has been going to church. Another story, a lady that grew up in the Marion County area had a child that was born with a birth defect. And she said this defect prevented him from speaking. So she started taking him to doctors to try to find out what she could do about it. She said doctors gave him no hope whatsoever. And she pursued it, and she said she was being a real pain to the doctors, and she insisted that they give her some kind of knowledge, something to do. And she said finally one doctor said that the only thing that he would know to do was to bring the child down here to Wichita. There was a place that was called the Institute of Logopedics at the time. I think it's now Heart Springs here in Wichita. And so she took him there, and the doctors did an evaluation of him, and they said that they had little hope. And they said that they could take him, but they would have to put him on a waiting list. And at the time, she said that the waiting list was about 70 kids long. And they told her that they had to, when more kids would come, that they would have to take the ones that they think they could help before they would take her son. So they said that there's not much hope that your child will get in, because we just don't have hope that we will be able to help him. She continued to pray for Father Capen's intercession. The following year, on May 23rd, the anniversary of Father Capen's death, she got a phone call from the Institute of Logopedics. They said that they had a space for their son, that she could bring him down. She brought him down for him to start taking the classes there at the Institute. By the following year, he was speaking in sentences. So once again, it's like just coincidences or not. The miracles that we're working on, Chase Cure, that is really written pretty much up in the book. The other one, like I say, is Avery Girlman. Her kidneys had shut down. Her kidneys were down for about 3 weeks. Her lungs, this disease had eaten holes in her lungs. So she was not able to breathe properly. They kept having to pump oxygen in her, had her in an oxygen tent, but the problem was, since she had holes in her lungs, when she would breathe, the air would go out into her chest cavity, causing pressure on her chest cavity and causing her heart, or preventing her heart from beating. They said her heart could contract, but once it would contract, that area would fill up with air, so it couldn't expand. So our heart couldn't function properly. The doctors that were working on her had come up with an idea for them to kind of alleviate the problems with her heart. He said that he called in favors from the surgeon to do surgery on her. He wanted them to put stents from her chest cavity into her stomach so that the air would be treated as gas and that it would alleviate the pressure. The doctor refused to do it. He said, "She's going to die. It isn't right for you to be doing this to her. People have the right to die, just as the people have the right to live." And he said that he told him, he said, "You owe me." He said, "Do this." So by the time they did the surgeon was so afraid that she would not survive the surgery. He did not think that she would even survive the trip to the surgery, the operating room. So they wound up doing the surgery there in the hospital room. But they did the surgery, and that did work, but the only thing that did was to help the heart beat properly again. They still didn't know what they were going to do about the ultimate or the beginning disease, because she was still attacking her lungs and her kidneys. Her family had been praying for Father Capen's intercession. Kind of as an interesting sidelight, Avery was a student at St. Patrick's School here in Wichita. When she was in 7th grade, the teachers gave them an assignment to do a report on a saint. She asked the teacher if, instead of doing a report on a saint, she could do a report on Father Capen. So they let her do the report on Father Capen. So it showed that the family had a devotion, and she got that from her grandfather. Had a devotion to Father Capen already, so they were praying for Father Capen's intercession. just out of the blue, her kidneys started to work again. And the kidney doctor said that is unheard of. They said after your kidneys are shut down for 2 or 3 days, she said it is very hard to get them to start. And she said for her kidneys to have been shut down for almost 3 weeks and for them to just start again is unheard of. Her lungs started to heal. She started to recover. All of the bodily functions that had shut down started back up again. Within days, the healing process continued. They said now that if you would take an x-ray of her lungs, that there would be no signs that her lungs had holes in them. They said even scar tissue that was there at the beginning is now gone. They said that with her kidneys, they said this disease that she had is rare in adults, and it is even more rare in children. They said that even for those that survive this disease, they have to expect to have chronic renal failure for the rest of their lives, meaning that they are on dialysis for the rest of their lives. Avery has no sign of it. They said if you would do a physical on her, that there would be no signs of this disease at all. When the doctors were talking about it, they had talked about it to the postulator, and they said that one of the doctors said that there's no evidence that she had this disease, and the other guy said no. He said, you can't say that. He said, first you have to say that there is no medical reason for her to be alive, and then you can say that there's no medical reason for her to be alive and in the shape that she's in. So Avery's graduating this year from Hotze JUCO College. I think she's going to be going to Wichita State. Wants to become a nurse because of the good treatment that she had while she was in the hospital. So,
How do you spell her last name?
Gerleman, Gerleman. There are stories about it in the Eagle. The Eagle ran stories about her also. So if you go to the Kapaun pages and the Wichita Eagle on the internet, you can pick up those. So.